We're here at the World Economic Forum at Davos, and I have the pleasure of having with me Brad Garlinghouse, the CEO of Ripple. Brad, thank you for being with us.
Absolutely, glad to be here. Thank you for coming to the Ripple temporary office.
Brad, listen, it would be, I guess, a big mistake of me not to start with what is in the minds of everybody, is topical, everybody's talking about it, so let's address it. FTX. There's a collapse, there's crypto involved. How is Ripple different?
Well, so I view Ripple as dramatically different, and actually, maybe I'll start by describing how I think about the FTX collapse. First of all, I don't even think of the FTX collapse as a crypto issue. It's a fraud. Whether you're dealing with crypto assets or, as Bernie Madoff was dealing with lots of different assets, or maybe he didn't have assets, I don't know. But, fraud is fraud, and, I don't know all the details of FTX, and of course the court process will play out. But Ripple is dramatically different in that at the core, we're an enterprise software company. We're selling bank infrastructure that uses blockchain technology to dramatically improve cross-border payments. So today, many of us are very familiar with what generally is called a Swift transfer, a wire transfer. Interestingly, by the way, the word wire transfer, the history of that refers to a telegraph wire. Click, 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 click. That's how we were transferring money, and we still hang on to that language. Why is it that it's slow and expensive to send money across borders when I can send an email anywhere in the world for free, anytime? And really, money's just ones and zeros at this point. Ripple selling technologies allow banks, financial institutions to send cross-border payments instantly, very, very, very low cost. So as compared to FTX, it's kind of apples and oranges.
Very good and very nice to hear. You touched upon Swift, so let's go there. Is Swift a competitor? Is Swift something that in a future scenario you would see working with? And what about transfers that happen through platforms like a Revolut or a WeChat?
Yeah. So Ripple decided early on that we wanted to be at kind of the infrastructure layer, and there's a whole bunch of strategic issues associated with that. One of them, quite frankly, is that if you work with regulated endpoints, that's where all the regulatory frameworks apply. KYC, know your customer, AML, anti-money laundering, all the acronyms. If you work just with regulated endpoints, they're making sure that is the case. Companies like WeChat have to do that regulatory work themselves. Now Swift is kind of a competitor. It's slightly more complicated than that because Swift is really just messaging. When you send a Swift transfer, it's not liquidity. You're actually sending bank messages to banks that have liquidity. So to some degree, Citibank and HSBC, really the top two, JPM, those are the top three liquidity banks. And when you're sending Swift messages, you're sending messages to banks to release liquidity and making sure the debits and credits match. So to some degree, really boil it down, Ripple's competing with the liquidity of Citi and the messaging of Swift, but in one, because we're both messaging and liquidity. And at the end of the day, again, as I described, Swift was developed 50 plus years ago. It architecturally hasn't really changed. It does remain slow, days. It does remain, relatively speaking, expensive. And actually, interestingly, it's quite error prone. And part of that is just, it's a one-way messaging protocol. So if I fat finger Tassos and I put one S instead of two in the middle, I guess you have three S's, but that will bounce back. They'll say, no, that account name doesn't match that person. That's an error. Now, if you use modern technology, you would get a real time, you're typing in Tassos an account number, you get a real time, okay, does that account match? Oh, I mistyped, I fat fingered that name. So that the efficiency, we see, instead of a 6% error rate as reported for Swift, you see 10 bips of error, so 99.9% effective. So we think these are better technologies that can be applied broadly to the vast majority of, frankly, all of the banking system by selling it as a wholesaler, if you will. And therefore, if we don't compete with the WeChats, WeChat could be a customer of ours.
You touched upon something that I think is very relevant and something we've heard a lot about, and that's regulation, right? You look at crypto, and if I look back, crypto started as something that was more anti-regulation, anti-system following the financial crisis of '08, and yet you are an advocate of regulation. How do you reconcile these two?
When I first got exposed to crypto, there's no question that the perspective was anti-government. Bitcoin kind of came from that heritage, and I always thought these are amazing technologies. But if you wanted to have the broadest impact for the broadest population, you needed to work with the system and work with governments and work with regulators. So really since the beginning of Ripple's life, we've been engaging regulators globally. And that has, I think, been to our benefit for sure, in lots of different jurisdictions. The United States, interestingly, is really behind lots of other countries. And here in Davos, I've made the argument to the various sessions around crypto that we spend too much time talking about the U.S. regulatory framework because it's quite a bit behind countries like the UK or Japan. Well, certainly Switzerland was early and aggressive in codifying and being specific about what the regulatory framework for crypto would look like. And when you're clear about the framework, that allows entrepreneurs and investment capital to flow in because it reduces risk. When you don't know what that looks like, if you're an entrepreneur, one of the first pieces of advice I give people is don't start your company in the United States at this point until the rules are clear. Most crypto entrepreneurs, I find, they want to follow the rules of the road, but if you don't know what the rules of the road are, that makes it hard.
You make them up or you don't know where to be.
Yeah, so if you operate and start, we're a very global business. If you were a Swiss company, well, you know what the Swiss regulatory frameworks look like. Even countries like the UAE and frankly even South Africa is getting ahead of the United States.
Very interesting perspective. And you touched upon something, regulation. There is an issue and an open dispute between you and the SEC on your crypto coin, the XRP, whether that is a security or not. And I know that a lot of people are really waiting and really the outcome is very important. What is your take on it? Where do you stand? What do you see the issues being there?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, it is very important, not just for Ripple, but really for the whole crypto industry. The U.S. is the largest economy in the world. Certainly, we want crypto to thrive as it is in other countries in the United States. The United States Securities and Exchange Commission has taken the position that Ripple's sales of XRP constitute an unregistered security sale. And it gets into this very nuanced legal definition of what is a security. We use XRP as a currency. We use it for cross-border settlement. It doesn't give you any rights or title or governance of Ripple. In fact, it's an open source technology that it's hard to think about. So if XRP is a security, it's a security of what company? Who should file the registration statement? If it's an open, should Ripple do that? The other frustrating part, two kind of just anecdotes on this. One, the only country on the planet, and we operate in 50 plus countries. The only country on the planet that has alleged that XRP is a security is the United States, which is odd when Ripple's been profitable. We pay taxes in the United States. I'm a U.S. taxpayer, and it's just kind of like, wow, this is frankly, it's the reason why we are doing more and more outside the United States, both from a hiring. Our second largest office is now London. Now, on the case itself, we think the law is actually clear, and we think the facts are on our side. We think the law is on our side. And so we're actually quite optimistic. The case has been going on for about 2 years. It's fully briefed in district court, federal district court in the Southern District. We expect closure within months. When the judge gets the case, you don't have a timeline. So the judge will take the amount of time the judge wants. But I'm pretty optimistic. I do think it's important for the whole industry, and I'm looking forward to closure.
Brad, if I may, and I really, for the whole industry, I hope that this comes sooner rather than later, because clarity is, as you said, very important. Let's talk a little bit about you. You are extremely driven. You are very successful. What are some of the experiences or leadership traits or anecdotes perhaps that you can share with YPOers that have influenced you or you think would be something well worth for them to consider?
Well, first of all, I'll give a plug for YPO, and I think it's part of leadership is being open to knowing what you don't know. And I think here YPO Forum particularly is, for me, has been a group of people who have been mentors and advisors, and both professionally and personally. But I think that the kind of knowing what you don't know, I try to spend a lot of time listening. I think my team at Ripple would describe me as decisive, but I am very much open to, and frankly, to sometimes their frustration. I'm like, I want the input. Before I make an important decision, I want I'm not going to go into a dark room and just make a decision and come out and say, hey, here's what's going on. And I think that has served us well, particularly in a new industry that's formative. It's kind of the pre-Cambrian era of crypto is, the last 6, I've been at Ripple now 8 years. And, being open to that feedback and always listening before kind of opining, I think has served me well.
And with that, let me ask you one thing, because we can share with YPOers. Blockchain and crypto is on a lot of our minds, right? And most people, unlike you, do not have the pleasure or the time or the know-how or a business immediately related with it to get into it.
Yeah.
How do you think somebody can stay on top of it, can stay ahead of the curve, or what are perhaps trends that you're seeing that YPOers should be aware of?
Well, I think if you kind of zoom out, at the most macro level, the novelty of a blockchain is to allow two parties to transact without trust, but with certainty. Now, let me pull that apart a little bit. Today, there's a lot of examples where you're settling a transaction, but there's almost always an intermediary, a security settlement, frankly, insurance settlement. There's so many examples where, whether it's the financial system, cross-border payments, where Ripple has focused, there's an intermediary there, and it's the commute of trust. If I'm a merchant down the street and I use Visa to commute trust, the merchant trusts Visa, Visa trusts me, they're commuting trust. But Visa's taking how many, 200, 300 bips for that privilege. Anyone who sits in that central counterparty basis could be disintermediated by a blockchain settlement, because now I can settle with certainty whether or not I trust you or not. If I go to the merchant down the street and I send a transaction with Bitcoin or something else, actually Bitcoin's not great for payments, we could get into that, but the merchant knows settlement is final. They have received the Bitcoin. And so you no longer need Visa. Now, to be clear, I'm not predicting the demise of Visa. I think that would be an aggressive statement. I'm more pointing out that if you're in YPO and you're thinking about what do these technologies mean for my business, if you're a business that's in a central counterparty business and you're taking a fee, a toll for that privilege, people will think about ways to put blockchains in that intermediary. I think it applies to government services. I met today with the Prime Minister of a country, and they're very excited about using blockchain for land registry. Think about the title insurance business.
So inefficient.
Big intermediary. They take a lot of value. If we had blockchain-based title management of ownership of who owns which property, arguably title insurance would change dramatically. That's a big industry to think about. Again, for YPOers to think out into the horizon about what these technologies mean. And frankly, it's one of the reasons why I compare blockchain to the early days of the internet. I had the good fortune of coming out of business school in '97 as the internet was kind of, as we know it today, being birthed. Remember, 2001, 2002 was a really difficult, dark time in the internet space. I think the same thing applies in the blockchain world. You're seeing the birth of an industry that I think is going to have broad implications beyond just cross-border payments. And yes, you're going to see crypto winters as we're experiencing. But don't forget, Amazon almost went out of business in 2001.
It's true. It's true. I've taken up a lot of your time. I want to close with one question. We're here at the World Economic Forum. What is the one issue you feel you would like to see addressed here?
Moving Davos to May. Okay.
Thank you.
It's a good big question. I mean, look, I find the value of being here. It does make me think bigger. I go to sessions that have nothing to do with payments, nothing to do with blockchain, and I think I enjoy going to some of these conferences once or twice a year to kind of just change the way you think about things as a leader, as a strategist for your business. Is there something WEF isn't attacking that I think they should? I guess the only thing I'll say is I still find WEF to be a little too US centric. I mean, there's leaders from around the world here, at least the sessions I'm going to, maybe it's because it's crypto. I just think the US is an important economy, but there's a lot, Ripple's business is 95% non-US. And so sometimes I find it to be a little bit too dominating.
Brad, thank you so much for being with us, and I hope to have the pleasure of continuing the dialogue in the future.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being with us.
Good to see you.